my last video, I took a look back at the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, and, you know, like I kind of expected, for the most part, people didn't really agree with the opinions that I said, and I didn't really expect them to. I understand that they're, you know, nostalgic or whatever, but I don't think I'll be pissing off anybody whenever I say that the Tasm Spider-Man movies are the worst timeline, and the second one is by far the worst Spider-Man movie. In my personal opinion, it's one of the worst superhero movies I've ever seen. Well, I'll save it, okay? We'll get to that. Now, my history with these movies is pretty simple. The first one, I used to kind of see a lot. Like, my dad would put it on whenever it'd be on cable back when we had it, and I just kind of catch glimpses of it here and there. And I saw the second one whenever it came out in theaters, but that was about it until they came out on Disney Plus, and I rewatched them like 2 or 3 years ago. But since I'm doing the series where I review all the Spider-Man movies, I rewatched them, and for a second, I swear to God, I kind of thought that I liked them. I know what everybody says about them, and I've heard it, and I did agree with it, but for a second, I thought that they were okay. But then I got to the second, and I was like, nope. No, these are really bad. They're really bad. But we gotta start with the first one. So Peter's parents basically just fucking abandon him within like the first 5 minutes of the movie. They leave him at his Aunt May and Uncle Ben's house. He grows up and then he sneaks into Oscorp, and then that's where he gets bit by the spider. He goes there because he's trying to like learn about his dad or something. It doesn't really make that much sense. The main villain of this movie is the Lizard. He starts as Dr. Connors, and he's trying to like change the world by changing how we can like self-heal. But then he goes crazy whenever he takes his bad guy serum before it was like even had human trials, like any smart scientist would do. And you guessed it, he doesn't really like Spider-Man just because he's kind of getting in the way of what he's trying to do. His plot, by the way, the Lizard's plan is to turn the entire city into lizards like him, like any smart scientist would do. Now, literally the first thing I noticed, the second that I saw Peter in these movies was, oh my God, Peter is way too fucking hot. One of my biggest critiques of the Sam Raimi trilogy was that Peter Parker was too much of a nerd. He was too much of a loser. In these movies, he is way too attractive. He's too cool. He's too arrogant. It doesn't work as Peter Parker for me. I'll say it again. Peter Parker is supposed to be kind of a nerd. He's supposed to be kind of a loser. He's supposed to be respectful. But this movie just can't fucking get that right. They make him a badass. He like skateboards and shit. Now, I'd assume that this also probably wouldn't work for most other people who've seen the other Spider-Man movies, because we've already seen Spider-Man movies where he's the kind of, you know, sweet, lighthearted guy, especially in the Tom Holland ones. This feels so out of place when compared to the other two Peter Parkers that I honestly don't understand how anybody could like this. He's way too confident. Like, Peter's not supposed to be a self-conscious fuck, but like, you know, he's supposed to have some pep in his step, right? He's full of himself the entire movie, and he's hot, but he knows he's hot, and that's the problem. Look at how he looks at Gwen in this scene. Are you fucking kidding me? That is not how Peter Parker acts to his love interest, ever. And speaking of that, the Peter Parker and Gwen scenes in this movie are absolutely terrible. And yes, I said scenes because there's kind of this theme where like we get these scenes where they're just kind of like mumbling to each other, and they're so cringe to watch. I've actually heard that some people like these scenes where they're just like fucking looking at each other for 5 minutes uncomfortably, but I think they're terrible. Half the time they feel like they come out of nowhere. Like, we'll go from like, you know, Peter talking to Uncle Ben, and then he's just rizzing up Gwen. And it also feels like in these scenes, Peter knows he's cool, and he's like acting like Gwen likes him, but he's also trying to act awkward to come off as cool. It feels like he's trying to act nervous, but he's not. It's so weird. It feels so inhuman to how anybody, especially a Peter Parker, would talk to the girl that they like. Now, the biggest thing about this duology, or whatever two movies together are called, is they're trying to be different, and they're trying to be the quote-unquote cool Spider-Man. And that's especially seen in the first movie. The sound effects in this movie are like, they're really sharp, right? Peter has like these fucking suction sound effects for like the stuff sticking to his hand. It's gross. And the soundtrack is all like dark and techy and like mysterious and shit. His suit is like darker and like it's really fucking ugly, but like it's dark, and like the eyes on it, they look like he's pissed off. Most of like the fight scenes and shit that happens in this movie is happening in like the night or in darkly lit environments. Peter's also always looking like he just got out of a street fight. Like, I understand he's Spider-Man, he's getting, you know, hit and shit, but like the other movies, they don't really show Peter looking like he just got, you know, thrown down 15 flights of stairs for the most part. But this movie, that's like its favorite thing to do, is just show, like, he puts, in the beginning of the movie, he puts raw meat on his face. That's just gross. And it doesn't work for me because I don't think Spider-Man at all is supposed to be cool or edgy. His coolness comes from him being a likable and respectful guy, not from him thinking that he's a badass. Now, I did say in my first video that I do think it's fine for comic book movies to change the original story to fit a movie adaptation, but the way they do it here, where they change like the entire tone of a Spider-Man story, is way too much of a change for me. Everything else Spider-Man that I've ever seen basically is him being a charismatic, likable, respectful, nerd, smart guy. In these movies, he's trying to be this badass. It's so out of nowhere, and it feels like the black sheep of the Spider-Man movies. Now, one scene I specifically want to pick apart is like this science scene, but there's a little bit of backstory for it. So Dr. Connors, aka the Lizard before he turns into the Lizard, meets Peter and finds out that he's the son of his dad, and his dad used to be like his lab partner or whatever, something like that. So Peter goes up to Connors' house and like his literal home address, and he gives him an equation for like his lifelong science project that he's been trying to figure out since birth. Like just on a piece of paper, he just writes it out. It's so fucking cringe, dude. And then just because Connor sees that, he fucking takes Peter under his wing as his next like scientist, co-scientist. Like after that, basically one establishing scene of them together, and there's a couple more before that, but basically after that one, he takes him in to work on that giant ass project that's not only important to him, but it's like to save Norman Osborn, who is the founder of Oscorp. It's like the most important project Oscorp's ever worked on, and he lets this random ass sophomore in high school come into Oscorp to work on it with him because he gave him an equation, which is what any good scientist would do, by the way. And of course, these movies being fucking corny and tacky and predictable, he figures it out instantly. He just fucking types in a couple buttons into the holographic screen that all the superhero movies use, and he figures out the lifelong equation right there on the spot. And this entire plot of the movie where Connors takes Peter under his wing basically and has him help him for this science problem feels so unnatural. No scientist in the world would ever do anything like that, nor would any company ever allow that. And this is really the only part in the entire duology where we ever see Spider-Man's intelligence. It's only used in this like really corny and cliche way, and it's like the only time it's ever brought up. But also like he's acting like he's cool for being smart. Again, that's something that Peter just doesn't do, but this Peter's supposed to be the cool one. Now the next scene I want to talk about, arguably the most important in the entire movie, is the scene where Ben dies, and it might be one of the most poorly written plot points in a live-action Spider-Man movie. So Peter and Ben were like fighting over Peter trying to like grow up or, be more independent or whatever, and then Peter leaves, right? He goes off to the city of Queens to get away from his uncle, and then his uncle just goes out to find him. Like, he's not following him. Peter leaves, and then Ben just goes walking around trying to find him in all of Queens. I don't know what the plan was there, but okay. And so while Peter's out on his little nightly stroll or whatever, he goes to a gas station, and him and like the gas station worker are being an absolute asshole. Peter's trying to buy this milk, but he's 2 cents short, and the gas station guy like won't let him buy it, but Peter's also being a dick, but the gas station guy's being a dick, like any Peter would do, just be an asshole. And after Peter, doesn't get his milk, he swallows his pride, he leaves, and then the gas station gets robbed for like $40 by an armed robber. And so the armed robber runs away with like his, 50 fucking doubloons or whatever that he got, and then he trips and he drops his gun, like any good robber would do. And of course, then we remember that this is the scene where Ben dies, and so Ben shows up, he's in front of the gun that the dude just dropped, and he runs and starts screaming at the guy, like any good uncle would do. And so then the guy picks up the gun, he shoots Ben, and then Peter appears out of nowhere, he sees it, and he's like fucking screaming. This entire scene is so unrealistic. Nothing that happened in this entire scene would ever happen in real life, ever. I get it's a superhero movie, okay? They're not the most realistic things in the world, but come on. Ben goes to just find Peter in an entire fucking city and then runs at a dude who dropped a fucking gun. Why would you ever do that? But then I think that the single worst sin that maybe this entire duology does is the way that Peter, quote unquote, avenges Uncle Ben after he dies. So just to recap, in the original Spider-Man movies, after Ben dies, Peter goes and chases down the dude that killed Ben. The dude who killed Ben then falls off a building, and then he feels remorse about it after that guy dies, and so he decides that he's going to use his powers for good to make sure that if he can stop it, nobody nobody else gets harmed the way his uncle did. In this movie, Peter goes out to find the guy who killed his uncle based on a little wrist tattoo that the police described him as having, and what he'll do is go up to random people and beat the ever-living shit out of them, but then if he realizes that they don't have the tattoo that his uncle's killer does, he just lets them go. And then he continues to do this constantly. He does this to multiple people, right? Being an arrogant asshole the whole time, I might add. Look at this shit.
Just let me go.
Is that a knife? Is that a real knife?
Yes, it's a real knife.
My weakness, it's small knives.
Just let me go.
Anything but knives! Well,
And I kid you not, the reason that he becomes Spider-Man, the reason that he puts on the Spider-Man mask for the first time is so that way he can hide his identity from the police, so that way he can beat up more people at night trying to find his uncle's killer. Like any good Peter Parker would do. There's this one scene where he's eating at Captain Stacy's house, and Captain Stacy is talking about how absolutely, terrible of a person Spider-Man is being, just going out and beating the ever-living shit out of people, and this is what Peter has to say about it.
I'm saying he's trying to help, and it looks like he's trying to do something maybe the police can't.
Something the police can't?
I think he stands for what you stand for, sir. Protecting innocent people from bad guys.
I stand for law and order, son. That's what I stand for, okay? I wear a badge. This guy wears a mask like an outlaw. He's hunting down a bunch of criminals that all look the same, like he's got some sort of personal vendetta. But he's not protecting innocent people, Mr. Parker.
I honestly think that this is the worst way they could have done the revenge plot for Spider-Man. It completely, in my opinion, misunderstands the character of Spider-Man. None of this is something that any Spider-Man or Peter Parker would ever do. The most they would ever do is what happens in the original Spider-Man, but he continues to assault random people to go out and be a criminal until he saves one kid, and then he goes, you know what? I wish I had a dad, and my dad didn't leave me. I'll start being a good guy. It's not even to avenge Ben at all. It really has nothing to do with Ben. That's what it's about. It's great. Also in this movie, the main villain, Dr. Connors, his plan makes just absolutely no sense. He wants to change the human anatomy, right? Give everybody a serum or whatever that can make them regrow limbs because big oh no, he has a missing arm. He gets kicked out of Oscorp for some point because he won't give the serum to Norman, who he's trying to use the serum for to save, because he doesn't believe that it's ready for human trials yet. But the Oscorp guys just aren't having that, so they just fucking kick him out. And then there's some sort of context scene where Connors is talking to this one guy, but I genuinely have no fucking idea what's going on in it because they gave the guy that establishes all of Connors' motives the heaviest fucking accent ever, and I still don't know what he was saying.
But he doesn't have time for every little step.
But I'm sure they said something fucking important because the next scene, Connor injects the little serum into his nub and it turns him into a bad guy. Who would have guessed it? And then the Lizard's plan, right, is to, after he sees the effect that his, unfinished cure has on people, he decides that he's gonna try to infect everybody in New York with it because he thinks that this is the next evolutional step for humans. Like any good scientist would, I mean, how fucking stupid is that? Just think about how awful that is. He wants to turn everybody in New York into fucking lizards. Who wrote this? Who wrote it? There's also this one scene at the end of the movie where Peter gets fucking shot and just walks it off, which, you can't do that. I think whenever people get shot, most of the time, that limb becomes completely unusable, and, sometimes it has to get amputated. I don't know. I just know that, at least from my knowledge, if you get shot in the leg, you can't just keep walking most of the time. But I could be wrong. What do I know? The characters in this movie are just fucking there. Peter, we've already talked about him. He's fucking full of himself, arrogant. He's hot and he knows he's hot and he doesn't even feel like a Peter Parker to me. But Gwen Stacy and him, actually, I'm gonna give this movie some credit. They actually seem like they like each other. I know that their scenes together, I said, are cringe. They're terrible. But it does seem like they actually care about each other, which is something that the, Raimi trilogy couldn't even get right. Now, Captain Stacy in this movie, Gwen Stacy's dad, the cop who hates Spider-Man, is the only one with a fucking head on his shoulders, right? Who the fuck in their right mind, at this stage of Spider-Man would think that he's a good guy? He just goes around and beats the shit out of people, and Captain Stacy is the only guy who sees that. And then his dying wish, I swear to God, the last thing that he says in this movie after he realizes that Spider-Man is Peter, who is dating his daughter, after all the shit that he's talked about Spider-Man, and he goes, listen, just keep my daughter out of it. Just don't get Gwen involved because he doesn't want his daughter to die. I think you can already assume where this is gonna go. Now, Ben and May, they're somehow even worse than how they are in the, Sam Raimi trilogy. They don't even fucking seem like they like each other or that they like Peter Peter. They're always talking shit or like yelling. Connor's hollow as shit. Lizard, I mean, the dumbest fucking villain I could imagine. And in conclusion, this movie feels like it's trying so hard to be different from the other Spider-Man movies, but it like doesn't work at all. It feels like Mark Webb genuinely doesn't even understand like the character of Peter Parker or Spider-Man or what makes them important or likable at all. But even though I've complained almost exclusively about this movie, it's honestly not the worst thing I've ever seen. The more and more that you think about this duology as Spider-Man movies, the worse they become. But a little tip and trick, if you can disconnect the idea of these being Spider-Man movies, they're not the worst thing in the world. I'd give this movie a 4 out of 10 because I genuinely feel like it had potential. And if there was just a couple rewrites or reworks of the story of the original Tasm movie, I feel like the second movie could have been a lot better, and maybe we could have even seen a third one. At least it's like semi-enjoyable, but that's like the best that I can give it. But hey, that's something that I can't even give its sequel, which is what we're gonna get into now. Now, the plot of this movie, Electro is this acoustic guy who loves Spider-Man, and he falls into a vat of eels, and then, you know, some shit happens and he hates Spider-Man. Now, Harry, you know, the other villain, he's about to die, and he wants Spider-Man's blood, but he won't give it to him, and then that's how he turns into the Green Goblin. I know, this sounds really like a really good story already. Gwen in this movie, she's gonna fucking die, and Peter, like, really wants to be with Gwen, but he also doesn't at the same time, and at the same time, he's also trying to learn about his parents. Oh, man. Oh, it's so fucking bad. Now, this is something that I saved to talk about this second movie with, but it's a problem that is, like, inescapable. I genuinely think it is very, very difficult to have Gwen Stacy as a genuinely good love interest in a Spider-Man movie. I know I said it in the third, you know, Spider-Man movie that she seemed like she actually liked Peter. That doesn't mean I think that she would have been a better love interest. She would have had her problems, but it did seem like she liked Peter in that movie. Whatever, we're not talking about that one. But the reason I feel like you really can't have her as a love interest is because Gwen Stacy, the name, is pretty much synonymous with her dying. Like, if you know anything about the Spider-Man lore, you know Gwen Stacy dies at the top of a clock tower. You don't have to know how, you don't have to know when, none of it, but you know that that happened. So because of that, basically the second that you see her on the screen in the first movie, you're already thinking, huh, what if she dies? You know, there's already a good chance that she's going to, and because of that, it limits how much that you can like seeing her and Pete together, or how attached you can get to her as a character. It can only do so much with her because they're gonna kill her anyway, and even if they don't, you're probably still not gonna like her as much as you could if it was MJ, because you think that she's gonna die anyway. It's also way too fucking obvious that she's gonna die in this movie. At the end of the first scene in this movie, there is clock ticking sound effects and church bells. Like, you could have just told me it was Gwen Stacy and that would have been a fucking clue enough. That would have been giving it away too much, just doing that. But like, even her like graduating speech when she's valedictorian is talking about how it's important that we cherish our time. Can you make it any more obvious for me? Now, in the beginning of this movie, there's this one scene that just pisses me off. I think it's already been critiqued before, but I'm gonna talk about it anyway. Spider-Man is too busy being an arrogant jackass to stop a villain who's killing people. So the Rhino's in this movie, believe it or not, and he's driving around this like semi, and he's crashing into shit, you know, crashing into cars, running over shit, driving horribly, and Spider-Man's on the roof of the car cracking jokes and fucking jerking off. Not stopping the villain who is killing people and causing many casualties. He's fucking around with him because he's too arrogant and too full of himself to realize the actual danger of the situation. I think, in my non-screenwriter opinion, the best thing that they could have done in this movie, the single best thing that they could have done to save the plot of this movie, is make Spider-Man have a progression where he's trying to be less arrogant. He was already full of himself and all the shit that I talked about in the first movie, so it would have been really cool as an audience to see in this movie if instead of him fucking around with Gwen Stacy the whole time, he's trying to become a more respectable, more humble version of himself. It would make him way more likable and relatable as an adaptation, but they don't do that. They just dial up the jackassery to fucking 11. Also, one thing I immediately noticed within the first scene of this movie was that the tone of it is completely fucking different. The last movie is like really dark and edgy and like gives off a techie feeling, and this movie is like bright and like, you know, colorful and serious. Now, usually I really like that. My favorite theme in all of video game and movie media is summer. Now, this movie kind of has that sort of tone, but it doesn't work whenever that tone is used to tell the worst fucking Spider-Man story in cinematic history. Also, Peter has a plasma screen TV in 2014. You know, fucking sick one. Another thing I noticed by around the end of this movie is that I feel absolutely nothing watching this shit. Whenever I watch Spider-Man 2, I come away and I feel like happy and like at peace. Whenever I watch Homecoming, I come away feeling motivated and inspired, and I even want more. When I watch No Way Home, I come home excited for the future, empowered, and feeling absolutely amazed by what I just watched. I watched this movie and I just want it to fucking end. It's predictable, it's poorly written, and it feels like a spit in the face to like what this duology, or, you know, what could have been of a trilogy could have been. Now, I know it kind of feels like, you know, well, I don't really understand what's going on in this movie or whatever, and that's because I haven't talked about the characters. Now, the characters in this movie, fucking I don't even want to talk. I don't want to read the script. Harry in this movie is in there. Can you believe that? Harry, he wasn't even in the last movie. You know, Spider-Man's lifelong best friend, that at least the, you know, original Spider-Man movies gave an attempt to try to get you to like him. Well, in this movie, he just shows up, and we're supposed to believe that Peter and him have been friends since they were like 8, but we don't even see him. Great fucking relationship and character building, Tasm too. Now, Harry's big plot point in this movie is that he's dying of the Osborn curse. I swear that is what they call that. Is watch this scene.
Has your hand started to twitch yet? When you lay awake and you feel it coming, hiding under your skin. I never told you that it's genetic. Our disease. The Osborn curse.
Norman Osborn, Harry's dad, is dying of a lifelong curse, quote unquote, that he's had called the Osborn curse. The movie can't even put a name on the poorly written plot that Harry's going through. That's how lazy it is. I can't get over it. The Osborn curse. That is so stupid. I'd read that in a Captain Underpants. Now, to try to cure Harry's Osborn curse, he comes to the bright idea that he's gonna use Spider-Man's blood, because apparently Spider-Man can self-heal, but like he hasn't done that in you know, either of the movies, but apparently he can, and he's too blindsided on like the verge of death to realize how fucking stupid that idea is. So he goes and asks Spider-Man, hey man, can I, you know, get your blood? And Spider-Man's like, nah, it's not gonna work, it's gonna make you die worse. And he just, you know, keeps drinking. It's so bad, dude. Sorry if I'm all over the place, this movie's just dog shit. And so Harry's like going through this database or whatever after Spider-Man won't give him his blood, and he realizes that Oscorp keeps like the spider venom like in a secret spot in the building or something, and so he's like, well, that's my only way to stay alive. And so he sneaks his way in there, he kills some guards like any 80-pound Harry would be able to do. And after everybody in the entire movie has told him that the venom is not going to work, he takes it, no fucking shit, it doesn't work, and then he turns into the Green Goblin with 15 minutes left in the movie. This is no exaggeration, I'm at all, the worst written supervillain I've ever seen in cinema, period. Like, no question. Every decision he makes is so stupid, and it's so obvious to the viewer. He's not relatable at all. His motives are based on a fucking movie disease that the movie can't even name. It's not even based in reality, and you feel nothing watching this dude progress through his bad guy arc. I could not care less about what's going on with Harry, because the movie didn't even bother to show me him in the first one. But hey, I'm gonna talk about something you probably didn't believe I would ever talk about this duology, and that's something good, okay? Believe it or not, this movie has one good thing in it, and that's Electro. Electro is this acoustic guy who builds like a, you know, crazy obsession over Spider-Man after Spider-Man saves his life once. You know, he thinks they're best friends in the whole wide world. He's getting treated like absolute shit at Oscorp, even though he's like really smart and he did something really important for the company. Like, he built an entire power grid for all of New York, and while he's like working overtime on his birthday, just because he was told to when he didn't have to, he falls into like a vat of electric eels, which fixes his tooth gap. That's really fucking stupid. But then he turns into Electro after that. He walks around the city as Electro for a little bit, and then he meets Spider-Man in Times Square, and Spider-Man forgets his name, which doesn't really make him too happy or whatever, because he thinks they're best friends. But he you know, moves on. It's Times Square, so there's like a ton of screens everywhere, and he's getting put on all the screens because it's this crazy, you know, fluorescent blue guy. And then the people directing the screens, turn them back all onto Spider-Man, and then Electro gets pissed off because he's like, what the fuck, you're too cool to be around me, you think you're more important or cooler than me? He gets mad at Spider-Man, and then he, like, you know, goes to the wires, and then he gets shot or something, I don't know, and he thinks it's all Spider-Man's fault. And he's honestly, you know, slap my tits and call me Sally, he's actually a decent villain. What he's doing is kind of stupid, but he is acoustic, even though that is a really cheap thing for the movies to do, but at least it gives him a solid reason to do all the things that he's doing. And it makes us feel for him as a character. We can kind of relate to this guy even if we aren't acoustic. His motives make total sense throughout everything he does in this movie. I swear to God, the acoustic blue guy has better motives than anybody in the Raimi trilogy. Can you believe it? Can you believe it? I'm gonna get so much shit for that. He doesn't do anything bad on purpose. He doesn't go killing people to kill people. Everything that he does is motivated by him now hating Spider-Man, and the only reason he hates Spider-Man is because he's acoustic, which is stupid, but it works, so I'll take it. Oh my God, guys. Tasm 2 did something I kind of liked, but wouldn't you believe it? It doesn't matter because it's drowned by the 40 other things this movie completely misunderstands about Spider-Man. But we still got that. Peter in this movie, he's like trying to get with MJ even after what Captain Stacy said after when he was dying, his dying wish, stay away from my daughter, but he goes to fuck her anyway. But then he's like, oh no, I can't do that, and he's bouncing back and forth the whole movie. And he's also doing this really, really dumb thing where he's trying to figure out all this shit about his parents. And for me, this whole situation that he's got going on with his parents just doesn't even work as a Spider-Man story for me. So let me elaborate. Peter Parker's dad made these spiders back when he was a scientist, and he made them connected to his DNA. Now, these are like the spiders that Peter gets bit by, but since he's connected to his dad's DNA, only he will ever have the effects that, you know, his dad gave for those spiders or whatever. But to me, the point of Spider-Man is that anybody could get bit by the spider. I think that's how they end Into the Spider-Verse. Like, anybody could have gotten bit by this, but it was Peter Parker, right? This nerdy kid, but he decides to use his powers for good because that's who he is. He's a good guy. That's the story of him, and that's why he's likable, right? But this completely, you know, spits in the face of that. It goes, no, Peter Parker was always gonna get this. He was always planned to be Spider-Man. No, don't do that. This, like, works as, like, a little short comic series, and I think they've done that in comics a few times before, but it doesn't work as to, like, you know, establish an entire Spider-Man timeline. To me, it completely misses the point of what Spider-Man is. And it's even worse because half the fucking movie is about this. And what does it even change anyway? He's already Spider-Man. And speaking of Spider-Man, he's not even really doing anything important in this movie. Like, even if he is, I don't even remember it. Maybe he's doing cool shit. I don't know. Gwen's death in, like, the first 10 minutes of this movie is teased because we already needed that. She's also going back and forth with Peter the same way he is for her. And her big thing or whatever is that she's gonna move to England because she's going to Oxford, and she's, like, you know, having to say goodbye to Peter or whatever, and then she just fucking dies at the clock tower. We already knew that was gonna happen, though. Like, the second we saw her in Tasm 1. And Aunt May, I'm not even, let's just go to the conclusion. She doesn't do shit. This movie takes a page right out of the Spider-Man 3 book where it's just doing, like, way too much. But unlike Spider-Man 3, everything that it's doing is terrible, except for Electro, he's okay. But terrible is the best that it does. At its worst, it's completely misunderstanding the point of Peter Parker and Spider-Man. And just as a little note to all the people watching this that are gonna go and write superhero movies, be very, very careful about putting more than one villain, because at least every time I've seen it, it has resulted in some of the worst superhero movies I've seen. This movie's like a fucking 2. If you asked me on a bad day, I'd say it's a 1. But, like, if you like Spider-Man, I want you to watch it or rewatch it if it's been a while, because I want you to see how terrible it is. I can't even believe this movie got the green light. Now, overall, the entire duology, how do I feel about it? I think that these movies are trying way too hard to be different, and it's always done in the worst ways possible. And I do think it is good to be different. I think it's important for, if there's going to be multiple reboots of a series, for them to all be distinct. And they are, but this one's distinct for all the worst reasons because it changes so many fundamental parts of Spider-Man's character. I said in my last video, and I still do believe this, I think that if you're adapting a comic book to a live-action movie, it's more than okay to change the original story to make it work as a better movie. But this completely changes everything that we know about Spider-Man, and it doesn't work because we've already seen 3 other Spider-Mans before this duology. We already know how Peter is. This completely changes Peter and everything everything else, and it does it in the worst ways possible. I think that these movies deserve all the criticism that they get, to be honest with you. And just so that way I don't get anybody saying I didn't say this, all the actors in both of these movies I think are doing a great job. They really are, but great acting can't save you from the shitty scripts. In my last video, I got to end it off with like the J. Jonah Jameson clip. I don't even get to have any positive thing to end this video. I'll find something.
I love Kangro on YouTube. I love Kangro.